17 minutes to escape. No more. Inside the narrow aluminum cylinder, smoke clings to the light, turning the white ceiling panels into gray clouds, and the soft fasten your seatbelt sign drowns under the hoarse beeping of the alarm system. The heartbeat is like a metronome. Knock, knock, pause, inhale, and squeak again. The pilots have oxygen masks on their faces, belts cut into their shoulders. The captain's fingers are trembling not from fear, but from overexertion. When you lose power on one side, every millimeter of the elevator movement is a struggle with real, non-training aerodynamics. Fire likes silence behind the panels, where it is not visible. Water likes visibility, clear, predictable, cool. It's not water that reigns in the cabin right now. There's a heat here that cannot be heard until the plastic begins to whisper, until the aroma of coffee mixes with the bitterness of molten insulation. At this point, passengers still do not realize that time has shrunk. But the cabin has a different sense of rhythm. The master warning flashes, the automatic machines click in the background like a short burst. Outside, there are ideal layers of the atmosphere, a trajectory calculated by minutes, an echelon where the wind is a formula and the temperature is a table. Inside, there's a chaos of microseconds, where one incorrect click on the machine can cost the entire display architecture. The contrast is not an accident. Aviation is like that, pure trajectory geometry versus the dirty physics of fire. Everything is stable and blue above, but under the ceiling panel of the toilet, it has long been not blue, but dark. The electric arc always chooses a shortcut. The heart of the cabin is pounding to the beat of the checklist. Masks put on, regulator, 100% O2, communication, headset, power supply, backup, inertial monitoring system. The sound changes timbre. Now the captain's voice is muffled, as if through a wall. And it is through the wall that the smoke is coming. Not flames from an urn, but a viscous mixture that has seeped through the cracks, as if someone had knocked over a jug with a shadow. The opposite of fire is not ice, but information, accurate, fast, and without ambiguity. She's missing now, and you can feel it in the pauses between remarks, in the way the first officer holds his finger on the toggle switch for a fraction of a second longer than usual. The cabin lighting is as if on a minimal dimmer. The scoreboard is the stars in the private DC-9 sky, and one of them has just gone out. No, it's not astronomy. It's just a device failure. When the usual compass disappears, the direction has to be heard by the dispatcher's voice and a tiny backup roll indicator. It's like sailing at night to a lighthouse that someone has covered with their palm, leaving only a thin rim of light. The heartbeat is getting faster. The alarm responds with a squeal in which the profiles differ. Master caution, electric, emergence inverter. The fire takes away the view. The smoke lies in layers like blankets on the battlefield. Water, on the contrary, returns visibility. It is enough to open the porthole slightly and get a shock current. But aerodynamics does not forgive improvisations. A roar bursts into the cabin. The temperature drops, and the smoke recedes for seconds. Seconds are capital. In these seconds, you can see the speed scale 140 to 150 knots to the landing, and you can see how the arrow of vertical speed tends down, resting against the mechanical stop. And again, the window is closed. Noise is the enemy of hearing, and hearing is the only thread to the dispatcher's counter-command. Technology against the elements. The CO2 fire extinguisher cools the visible, but does not reach what is heated inside the frame. The passenger oxygen system looks nice at briefings, but in smoke without an airtight seal, it turns into a trap. The lungs will pull everything in the air. Pilots have real protection, a positive pressure mask, glass that fumes up from their own breathing, and need to wipe it with their sleeve right on the glide path. There is an evacuation checklist on the table, and in my head was a map of the airfield that wasn't on the plan. The panel is shaking barely noticeably. The shaking is not turbulence, but a combination, extended interceptors, and speed near the red zone. It takes energy to get to the runway, and you need to reset it so as not to fly over. Aerobatics turns into chess. Each move takes seconds and returns meters. Go down, but don't lose your trajectory. Keep up speed, but don't melt the brakes. The contrast here is in the body of the aircraft itself. The stabilizer loves electricity, and the steering wheel loves muscular strength. There is little electricity right now, so the power is at its limit. The sounds in the cabin are different. Coughing, dry clicks of belts, muffled prompts from the crew, without a common connection, only manually from row to row. Ventilation against smoke is a chess game where each valve either helps or makes it worse. Shutting off the air conditioning means giving less oxygen to the fire, but more power to the smoke. To open it means to take the smoke outside, but perhaps to feed the hearth. Water against fire, air against smoke, and no solution is free. The dispatcher hears and does not see. The pilots see less than they hear. At this moment, aviation once again shows that it is both a science and an art. Faith in procedures and trust in the voice on the ground combine into one straight line, heading for the runway, where the approach lights have already been turned to maximum. There should be concrete behind the clouds. Concrete is hardness, the opposite of smoke. If they make it, the concrete will take over the inertia and the firefighters' equipment will take over the heat. If not, the smoke will take control in time. The 17 minutes for rescue begin with the first click of the machine and end with a moment of silence when the racks touch the lane. Between these extremes is everything that distinguishes the story of an investigation from the chronicle of a loss. The accuracy of speech, the difference between fire in the urn and hearth behind the panels, the difference between a sober mayday and a dangerous moment of complacency. The pulse is accelerating. The alarm is responding. The fingers rest on the pull levers. The question now sounds without pathos, like a working team. Will they have time to land before the smoke takes away control? June 2nd, 1983. It's warm, as it only happens in South Texas. The air trembles over the concrete strip, and hot waves seem to lift the silver DC-9 belonging to Air Canada, even before the pilots apply thrust. There are 41 passengers on board, 5 crew members, and a regular flight from Dallas to Montreal with a short stop in Toronto. No delays, no special schedule changes, just another 3-hour flight. The DC-9 is already a veteran. His project was born in the 60s, an era when engineers drew lines by hand, and the metal of airplanes smelled of grease and pride. This particular board is 15 years old. He flew for thousands of hours, connecting cities that most passengers wouldn't even remember. Over the years, he has become a familiar workhorse, not fashionable, not fast, but reliable. Or at least he seemed that way. From the outside, its cladding shines just as much as the Texas sun allows. Inside, calmness. Flight attendants are checking their belts, children's hands are holding plastic cups of juice, and outside the windows the runway is melting in a haze. Everything is as it should be. In the cockpit, Captain Donald Cameron, 51, is a man for whom the sky is more familiar than the roads. More than 13,000 flight hours, almost 5,000 of them on the DC-9. His partner, Claude Ouimet, 34, is precise, built, and has been flying for a decade, half of his time on the same type of machine. This is a crew that is trusted without hesitation. In front of them are instrument panels, buttons, lamps, switches. Each of them has its own story, and each has its own sound. If someone had listened, they would have heard the fuses clicking softly behind them after the generators were turned on. Then, this is the sound of normal system operation. But it is he who, after an hour of flight, will become the first alarming knock of fate. In the meantime, everything is perfect. At 1625, the airliner lifts off the ground, gaining altitude over the green plains. Through the portholes, you can see how storm clouds are slowly gathering near the horizon. dense, white, with dark seams. For pilots, this is a common summer phenomenon, a game of air masses from which it is enough to simply turn around the course. The exterior is an impeccable picture. The silver body reflects the sun, the turbines hum evenly, and the instruments show a steady climb. The temperature drops with every meter, and the higher the plane rises, the calmer the faces in the cabin seem. The captain turns on the autopilot and makes the usual entry in the log. Takeoff, heading north, echelon 330. Everything is according to the procedure. But an airplane is not just metal. It stores memory. 3 years ago, the same aircraft had already experienced a serious incident. The destruction of the rear pressurization chamber, severe depressurization, and damaged control systems. Then it was carefully restored. The panels were changed, the cables were relayed, and the soldered bundles of wiring were connected. Technically, it's new, but for engineers, there is a difference between new and newly assembled. Over the past year, mechanics have recorded dozens of technical log entries, 76 malfunctions related to generators and the electrical system. Everything is fixed, all signatures are valid. But airplanes, like humans, age unevenly. You can change your organs, but your character remains. The captain knows about it. He knows, but he doesn't think. Now his attention is on the instruments, stabilizer, thrust, exhaust temperature. Everything is in the green zone. He takes a sip of coffee, looks around the flat field of clouds, and says to his partner, "It's a good day to fly." He nods, smiling, and returns to dinner, complaining that the steak is too dry. The seconds pass steadily, like a metronome. There's the sun outside the window, and a white foam of clouds under the wing. No one knows that a barely audible crackling is already beginning under the back panel of the toilet. It's not flame, it's not smoke, it's just a tiny, almost imperceptible smell of superheated plastic. Where the cable touches the cable, the microscopic arc makes its first movement. The passengers are laughing, the pilots are discussing the weather, and the plane is heading smoothly and confidently. And somewhere behind them, between the wall and the fuselage, the first clicks in the dashboard are already sounding. It took a little over an hour after takeoff. The plane calmly maintained an altitude of 33,000 feet. The autopilot pulled the route line through the clouds, and silence, a rare luxury for aviation, reigned in the cabin. First Officer Claude Ouimet was finishing his lunch, complaining that the steak was a little overcooked. Captain Donald Cameron, the senior in rank and experience, flipped through the on-board technical log, idly noting old notes, generators, switches, signals. Everything is fixed. Everything is working. And suddenly, a click, then another one, and more. 3 short shots, like someone banging on metal somewhere behind the wall. Both pilots turned their heads. The sound came from a panel of automatic machines, a panel with hundreds of small buttons, like fuses. Everyone is responsible for a separate system. When it crashes, it means that there's an overload, short circuit, or overheating somewhere. Cameron gets up, turns to the dashboard behind the chair, and immediately sees that 3 submachine guns have come out of their sockets. Everyone is in the same group responsible for the flushing system in the back toilet. It's nothing serious. This has happened hundreds of times. The pump motor could just jam. Maybe the passenger threw something wrong into the toilet. He returns to his chair, reaches for the panel, and pushes the machines back into place with a practiced movement. 1, 2, 3. Click. A split second later, 3 light claps again. Everything repeats itself. They don't even have time to lock in the on position before they fly back out. "That's weird," Cameron says, looking at Ouimet. Too abruptly, like a machine gun. He records the observation in a tech magazine, another little thing for technicians in Toronto. In the 70s and 80s, DC-9s suffered from chronic electrical failures. It wasn't considered disturbing, but rather inconvenient. Like a light bulb that burns out once a week, it's annoying but not scary. This is precisely the main paradox of aviation. The more the system improves, the more we begin to trust small failures. The human brain filters the familiar. If the machine pops up as usual, then everything is under control. The captain calmly writes down new lines. Circuit breaker, AFT lavatory flush motor. Pop decks 3, reinserted, tripped again, will require maintenance. There is complete confidence on his face. No panique. After all, they do not feel any smell, vibrations, or changes in the devices. The plane is moving perfectly smoothly. Ouimet is joking. Maybe someone put the towel in the bathroom again. Cameron smiles. At least it's not a pressure drop this time. Everything seems to fit into the logic of minor problems. And this logic is reassuring. But it is precisely the habit of small things that becomes a trap. When the security system is too reliable, a person stops looking for depth in the problem. This is called confirmation bias. We are not looking for the truth, but for a comfortable explanation. The captain makes a note in the margins. Toilet pump overheating, and closes the magazine. For him, it's just a line of dozens of the same ones that await the attention of engineers after landing. In the meantime, calm down. Drinks are served in the cabin. Someone opens a magazine. Someone adjusts the headrest. At an altitude of 33,000 feet, it seems that even time passes more slowly. Just beyond the thin skin of the fuselage, 90 feet behind the cabin, between the metal and plastic toilet panels, something else is already beginning. A barely noticeable smell of insulation, almost imperceptible heating, the crackle of a microscopic arc between two wires, where a spike was once made after an old repair. While the crew is writing a report and laughing over a dry steak, something is already smoldering behind the partition that no one sees. It's only been 9 minutes since the machines clicked 3 times and returned to their place. The plane continued to move smoothly, as if nothing had happened. The captain made a note in the log. The autopilot was heading, and ahead was a calm blue sky. But in the rear part, behind the partition, the air was already becoming different. At first it was just a light shade, not a smell but a hint. It's like someone briefly turned on an old soldering iron. Several passengers sitting closer to the tail exchanged glances. Someone grimaced. Someone joked that, apparently, someone fried the wiring. The laugh was short and hesitant. The stewardess noticed that the smell was getting stronger. She was walking down the aisle, smiling at the passengers. But as she approached the back toilet, she felt a burning electric note. The one that always makes professionals wary. She knocked on the door, and there was silence. She opened it carefully, a barely noticeable crack. And from there, as if someone exhaled from the depths of the plane, a light gray smoke came out. Not clouds, not fire, just fog, thick and uniform, without a source, without a flame. The smoke was everywhere, under the ceiling, near the floor, creeping along the walls. It didn't look like a trash can where someone had thrown a cigarette. In 1983, this happened quite often. Here, the smoke came from inside, from somewhere behind the plastic. The flight attendant slammed the door and, trying not to attract the attention of passengers, headed forward. "I think there's smoke," she said briefly to the crew chief. He instantly realized that he needed to act now, while he could still breathe. He grabbed a silver Kotu fire extinguisher from the compartment, cold, heavy, with a short hose and a pressure gauge that needs to be checked automatically. He returned to the door, took a deep breath, and yanked it open. A stream of gray steam burst out from inside. The smoke was already spreading to the floor like mist over a river. He didn't see any flames or red reflections, only a thick layer obscuring the view and a faint crackling somewhere below, behind the skin. The fire extinguisher hissed as a short jet of snow hit the wall, ceiling, and dumpster. He directed the stream to where the smoke was coming more strongly, along the seams between the ceiling and the wall, along the joints, along the door of the urn. Everything is up to the last second of gas. It got colder inside, but the smoke didn't disappear. The chief steward closed the door, trying to isolate the source. The air behind the panels moved, and for a moment it seemed to him that the smoke had settled. He exhaled. There is no flame. That's the main thing. He didn't know that it was just an appearance. That chemistry has already begun behind plastic panels. Thermal decomposition of insulation, evaporation of polyvinyl chloride, which releases a caustic gas when heated and can smolder for a long time without giving itself away as fire. They did everything they were taught, to smother the fire with carbon dioxide and block the air supply. But this decision, which was correct according to the instructions, turned out to be fatal in fact. Behind the wall, the fire remained alive, slowly feeding on the insulation and air seeping through the tiniest gaps. Meanwhile, passengers began to be moved closer to the middle of the cabin. The air was getting thicker, and the smell was no longer just burnt, but sweet and heavy. People felt that something was wrong, but they didn't panic. The crew looked confident. The pilots still didn't know anything in the cockpit. No warnings, no alarms. Everything is calm, all parameters are normal. They talked to the dispatcher, changed the frequency, checked the clouds on the radar. For them, this silence is a sign of control. Ideal conditions for a fire behind the panels. Behind the plastic, where carbon dioxide had just been gushing, the metal was already changing color. The wires were gently losing their insulation, and the air in the narrow space was filled with vapors, invisible but deadly hot. The door was closed. Everything looked calm, but the door was closed, not the source. And now everything that happens behind the panels is just beginning. When a message reached the cabin, it sounded calm, almost casual. "Captain, we seem to have a fire in the back toilet." No screams, no disturbing notes. Just a short phrase on the intercom. Captain Donald Cameron immediately raised his head, exchanged a glance with Ouimet. The word fire in the air sounded like a click on the nervous system, familiar but always alarming. "What exactly is on fire?" he asked. There was no response, and the connection was interrupted. All the crew knew was there's smoke in the tail. Neither the source, nor the character, nor the scale. For pilots who grew up in an era when passengers could still smoke on board, this didn't sound like a disaster, but a typical problem. The smoker threw the butt into the trash can. The paper was picked up, the flight attendants extinguished. Things happen. Cameron decides to send the first officer to check the situation. "Go take a look for yourself," he says. "I'll put on a mask and stay in touch." He takes an oxygen mask, fastens the straps, turns on the feed. The year is 1983. At that time, there was no full respiratory protection for all crew members on board. Filter masks, self-contained breathing apparatus. All this will appear later as a result of such stories. Then it's just a captain's mask with oxygen supply. The first officer leaves without anything. No respirator, no glasses. Just a shirt, a tie, and a determination to figure out what's going on. He opens the door from the cabin and takes a couple of steps towards the cabin. Hot, dry air hits you right in the face. The smoke comes in waves, not white, like from paper, but gray-brown, dense, heavy. It's getting harder to breathe with every meter forward. He covers his mouth with his hand and tries to move on, but after a few seconds his eyes start to water and his throat burns. He sees nothing but the contours of the seats and the silhouettes of the passengers, who are already looking in his direction. Going back is the only option. He manages to notice how the flight attendants are moving people closer to the middle of the plane. They look tired but not panicked. The chief steward tells him, coughing, "The smoke is not from the urn. There seems to be something behind the wall. We can't get there." This phrase is the key, but it gets lost. When Ouimet returns to the cockpit, he is out of breath, his eyes are red, and his voice is hoarse. He reports to the captain, "Heavy smoke, nothing is visible. We need to go down." He doesn't mention the main thing. The steward's words that the fire is behind the panels. It's a small thing, but it will determine the course of events. Cameron listens, frowning. His brain immediately builds a familiar pattern. There's a lot of smoke, but if it's an urn, it means the fire is local. He has already encountered similar situations. Flight attendants extinguish, smoke clears, passengers cough, but everything ends normally. He takes a breath. The hissing sound of oxygen supply can be heard through the mask and decides to wait. After a couple of minutes, the senior flight attendant looks into the cabin. We move the passengers forward. The smoke seems to be clearing. His voice sounds calm, convincing. Cameron turns around. The interior really seems cleaner through the open door. The gray clouds that recently filled the passage are getting thinner and lighter. The first officer looks at the captain. Both of them sigh with relief. "It looks like it's been put out," says Ouimet. The captain nods. "Okay, come back and check it again." And carefully, he stays in the cockpit, flipping through the tech magazine again. 3 knocked-out submachine guns, then a message about a fire. 2 problems, but probably unrelated. It's always easier to think that way. He doesn't even realize that they are directly connected. Ouimet comes out again, now with a captain's mask. It goes up to the middle of the cabin, but then the air is already thick, almost opaque. The air doesn't just smell, it burns. The carbon dioxide in the tail of the aircraft has long since dissipated, and the fire hidden behind the skin has entered a new phase. It is not visible, but heats metal panels, melts cables, and emits smoke into the ceiling of the cabin through ventilation ducts. While the officer coughs and comes back, Cameron notices through the rearview mirror that the smoke is really going away. He leans back in his chair, takes a deep breath through his mask. The reduction can wait. There is no panic. But the smoke does not disappear. It goes into new ways, into cracks, into ventilation. Now it moves quieter, more evenly, like fog under the skin of an airplane. The captain sees that the smoke seems to be dissipating, but he doesn't know that the reason for this is not a victory, but a burnout in the ventilation systems. And this deceptive order is the most dangerous condition of all. The plane is moving smoothly. The autopilot is heading. The instrument arrows are motionless, as if nothing is happening. Calmness is at the controls. Captain Cameron makes a short entry in the log, takes a look at the parameters. Everything is fine. Outside, there is sunshine, silence. The horizon is clear. No signs of trouble. The smoke in the cabin, which had been thickly hanging from the ceiling a few minutes ago, seemed to be thinning. People are finally starting to breathe more evenly. Someone is letting go of the armrest. Someone has even tried to return to the magazine or to the conversation. The flight attendants try not to show alarm. They open the ventilation nozzles to squeeze out the remaining smoke back to the tail. The air becomes clearer again. At first glance, it's a victory. In fact, it's a trick of the eye. The fire did not go out. He just broke through a new path for himself. Inside, behind the toilet wall, the temperature is rising. When the fire reached the plastic ducts, it burned through them, opening new channels. Now the smoke goes into the technological niches and exits through the ceiling, seams, and ventilation. That's why it feels like he's disappearing. For the crew, this is a signal to calm down. Cameron, sitting in an armchair, notices a pattern. Yes, it looks like there was a dumpster. The flight attendants worked well. He makes a mental note. Let's land, inform the technicians. It all fits. Everything is logical. His brain, trained by thousands of hours in the air, chooses a familiar explanation. What is called the rule? When you hear a clatter, think of a horse, not a zebra. In aviation, it's almost a law. If there's a fire, look for a cigarette, don't look for a disaster. The stats are on his side, and this is the most dangerous certainty of all. First Officer Ouimet returns to the cockpit, removes his mask, and takes a deep breath. The interior is cleaner. Everything seems to be quieting down, he says. The captain nods, his gaze calm. So they put out. No alarms, no deviations. Everything is working. Everything is quiet. Meanwhile, at the back, the chief steward checks the toilet. Without opening the door, just touching the panel with his hand to make sure everything is under control. And then he feels warmth. Not heat, but a strange, dry, dense warmth, as if from a battery. He reaches for the door handle, and the metal burns his fingers. He pulls his hand away. My heart shrinks. The smoke seemed to have gone away, but behind the wall, another, invisible process continues. The fire doesn't go out. It grows slowly, confidently, moving through cables, through voids, and through insulation. From the outside, everything seems better. Passengers are sitting in front. The cabin is filled with steady light. Someone even laughs, commenting on the delay in service. The air is fresh because the ventilation now draws in the smoke and takes it to a place where it is not visible. And behind the wall, there's still the same fire. Only now it's breathing air from new cracks, heating metal, melting plastic, and doing what fire always does, waiting to be noticed. The door handle is already hot, and inside, there is a completely different development of events. The first signal was a short, sharp peak, followed by a sound familiar to every pilot: master caution. The yellow light on the panel flashed like a match in the dark. Captain Cameron automatically reached out, pressed the reset button, and noticed that the lamp was not going out. The electrical system failure indicator on the port side lit up on the panel. A moment later, a second warning. The indicators flash, the lights go out, and the hands on the instruments begin to shake. "We have problems on the left chain," says Wyatt shortly. The captain answers calmly. "Let's check it out. Maybe it's just an overload." But at the same second, the compass needle freezes and then makes an illogical jerk to the side. It is followed by gyroscopic devices. They lose synchronization. A slight wrinkle appears on Cameron's face. This is no longer an ordinary little thing. It's not an urn, not a cigarette. That's not it. Almost simultaneously, the signal of the transponder disappears, the very device that transmits altitude and call sign data to dispatchers. On the screens at the Mission Control Center in Indianapolis, their mark disappears. The Air Canada 797 simply disappears from radar. The controller doesn't understand what happened for a few seconds. Then he turns on a backup mode. The good old primary radar, where only the reflected signal from the aircraft body is visible. No codes, no height, just a dot. Now, they will have to fly this flight blind. The tension in the cabin is rising. Cameron, no longer distracted by the recordings, feels the steering wheel getting heavier. The stabilizer's electric drive has stopped working, and now the pitch control is only through mechanical cables and a servo system. This means that every turn is physical work. He presses himself into the chair, pulls the speaker toward himself with both hands, feeling resistance, as if he is struggling with living metal. The smoke returns, this time not from the cabin, but from under the dashboard. The captain clenches his teeth, turns on the emergency power, but it feeds only a part of the systems. The lights go out, the appliances dim, the masks cover their faces, and the hiss of oxygen becomes louder than the engine. The problem is not overload. He says, "We have an electrical fire." The first officer nods, and now everything is working out. 3 machine guns knocked out, smoke, and now a generator failure. The line between "there may be an urn" and "our fuselage is on fire" becomes obvious. At this moment, hot air is being drawn from the tail. The temperature is rising, and the smell of melting insulation is now making its way even through the filters of masks. Ouimet looks at the captain. His eyes say one thing: we need to descend urgently. Cameron decides not to waste a second. He takes his hand to the traction levers, abruptly switches them to idle, minimum mode. Then he pulls the spoiler handle up until it stops. The air outside instantly howls, as if the plane is caught in a squall. The DC-9 begins to fall nose down, moving from stable flight to emergency descent. Outside, the clouds are tearing apart like a curtain, revealing an endless gray horizon. The air is whistling. The speed gauge is pointing at the red zone. 310 knots. 320. The plane is falling faster than the instruments can react. The dispatcher in Indianapolis catches the reflected mark on the screen and reports to Cincinnati. It looks like Air Canada 797. They have a fire. They are descending. On the other side of the broadcast, Cameron no longer responds with standard phrases. His voice is now short, harsh, choked with oxygen, declaring emergency. Fire on board, descending immediately. The electricity goes out, navigation devices fail one by one, the course changes jerkily. Pilots no longer see the altitude on the digital display, only the mechanical arrows. The spoiler levers are shaking in my hands. The wings are shaking from the oncoming traffic, but the plane obeys. And now it all comes down to a simple equation. There is speed, there is gravity, and there is time, which is catastrophically short. With every meter down, the fire takes away more and more systems. The panels and the tail flare up from the inside. The smoke turns into a dense curtain. Passengers are coughing, some are praying, some are just holding onto the seat in front, looking at nothing. On the captain's instruments, the vertical velocity arrow goes beyond the scale limit. The plane is losing altitude faster than you realize, 6,000 feet per minute, and all the crew has to do is keep the nose of the plane balanced between control and chaos. Now, it's a 6,000 feet per minute vertical speed race. When Cameron declared an emergency, his voice sounded steady on the air, but every word was calibrated with effort. Mayday, Mayday, Air Canada 797. Fire on board. Descending. On the other end of the radio network, the dispatcher instantly came to life, hanging on every word. Got it, 797. Cincinnati is 25 miles away. Can you make it? 25 miles. Nothing for a healthy airplane. For a burning man, eternity. Cameron answers without hesitation. We'll try. The thrust levers are shifted to zero. The spoilers are raised. The plane is falling, accelerating every moment. Overboard, the speed rings like a taut string. Everything that used to be smooth has now become sharp, almost physically tangible. There is a different reality in the salon. The air is hot, dry, and saturated with the bitterness of molten plastic and insulation. Passengers seated forward hold wet wipes to their mouths, as the flight attendants taught. The ventilation hums faintly, but it doesn't get rid of the smoke. On the contrary, it pulls new jets from the tail. Someone asks why the pilots don't lower their oxygen masks. The answer is simple, because it won't change anything. Passenger masks are not airtight. They supply a mixture of air and oxygen, but they do not protect against smoke. Under them, you can breathe in the same as outside, only deeper. This is not a rescue, but a trap. Therefore, the crew decides not to activate the system. The main thing now is landing. Every breath counts. Meanwhile, it's getting harder to breathe in the cabin. Smoke penetrates under the doors. The pilots' masks fog up. The glasses are covered with a thin film of moisture. Cameron doesn't see the height scale, just blurry numbers. He wipes the mask with his hand, takes a breath, and takes the helm again. The air in the cabin is hot, the instruments burn the palms, and the panel lining is like a warm stone. First Officer Ouimet tries to contact Cincinnati through the microphone. His voice breaks off, interrupted by the noise of oxygen flow. We're losing our instruments. Electricity is emergency only, he reports. Got it, I see you, the dispatcher replies. Keep heading north, we're sending you to 36th. But he doesn't see it. There's only an ensign mark on his screen, and he's mistakenly marking the wrong plane. While Air Canada 797 is rapidly descending in the clouds, the dispatcher has already confused them with another flight, Colonel 383, flying in the same sector. At this moment, there is only noise in the cabin. The controls vibrate, the warnings flash, the instrument arrows freeze and come to life again. Masks creak from straining belts, oxygen hisses. Cameron says dully, as if from underwater, "We're going blind. If we don't get out of the clouds before 3,000, there's no chance." He's right. There's a dense layer of gray masses below them, and all that is visible is the faint glow of the instruments and the red lights of the buttons. People don't talk in the salon anymore. The air is so dense that every breath is like through a damp cloth. Someone is squinting. Someone is looking at the ceiling where there is no light anymore. The flight attendants move silently, coordinating passengers with gestures. And somewhere on the ground, the dispatcher, looking at the screen, is sure that he is talking to another plane. His course, his calculations, his landing strip. Everything now is not built for those who really fall through the clouds. The plane is losing altitude, 25,000, 2015. The vertical speed arrow is still pressed against the limiter. Cameron keeps the plane at the limit of aerodynamics. Ouimet is silent, listening to the sound of the wind and the crackle of the headset. And the dispatcher has already confused them with another flight. The dispatcher finally realized the error. On his screen, the two markers were moving almost parallel, and until that moment he was sure that he was communicating with the Continental 383. But now it became clear that one is going higher, and this one, which is falling at breakneck speed, is Air Canada 797. He quickly changes the plan. Earlier, he led them to northbound lane 36, but now, realizing where they are, switches the route. Air Canada 797, turn left, lane 27 left, 2 miles west. The problem is that the crew no longer has a compass. The electrical systems have been permanently disabled. The gyroscopic instruments have lost their orientation, and the magnetic indicators in the cockpit have simply frozen. Turn left is no longer a command, but an intuition. Cameron carefully tilts the steering wheel to the left, feeling resistance. The plane obediently reacts, but without instruments, it does not know how strong the tilt is. Stop the turn. The dispatcher's voice comes from the headphones. Cameron levels the plane. Pause. Great. Here you go. You're going straight to the airfield. He doesn't know where exactly straight is. Everything is based on hearing, on trust, on the feeling of the body in space. In the smoke and vibration, it's akin to flying blind, where the only navigator is a voice from the ground. The temperature rises in the cabin. The air becomes viscous. The captain tries to keep his breathing under control, but the smoke is getting thicker. The devices are almost invisible. Their backlight flashes and goes out. I can't see anything, Ouimet says dully, wiping the glass of the mask with difficulty. We should at least reduce the smoke. He climbs to the air conditioning panel and switches the switches, turning off both air conditioning packages. There is a simple logic in my head. Less air supply means less oxygen for the fire. Maybe it will give you a few minutes. Cameron nods, not arguing, but they both don't know that this decision will become a new trap. Air conditioning is the only way for fresh air to enter the cabin. After turning off the system, Ouimet shut off the ventilation. Now all the smoke that used to escape somehow is trapped inside. The first seconds are relief. The airflow subsides. The noise goes away. It seems to have become quieter. But after a minute, the smoke begins to accumulate again, denser, thicker. The air heats up quickly, and the smell of plastic turns into a pungent mist. They can already be seen from the outside. The dispatcher transmits the coordinates to the firefighters. The burning plane is descending to 2,500, heading to the 27th left. The lights were almost out in the cabin. People breathe short, covering their faces with wet towels. The flight attendants sit in their seats at the front door, fasten their seatbelts. Only the flashing exit lights are reflected in their eyes. In the cabin, every breath is now like through an ash filter. Cameron leans closer to the glass, but sees only a gray mess of clouds. We have to get out of them right over the runway, he mutters. Otherwise, that's it. The dispatcher gives short commands. Slightly to the left. Good. Straight. Pause. Stop turning. Great. Keep heading. The steering wheel in his hands is heavy, as if connected to the metal itself. Every movement requires strength, but the captain does not let go. His fingers have already cut into the leather of the gloves. The altitude is 3,000 feet, 2,800, 2,500. They pass through a dense layer of clouds, and still nothing is visible. Just a gray sky and a horizon like milk. Firefighters are already preparing somewhere below. They're waiting, but they don't see any lights yet. The pilots continue to listen, one voice from the headphones and their own breathing under the mask. They're below the clouds, but the airfield is still out of the picture. The altimeter shows 2,500 feet. There is a solid gray wall outside the cabin. There are no landmarks, no hint of land, just the steady roar of air turned into a viscous cloth. Cameron squeezes the steering wheel until his fingers ache, feeling the metal resist. The controls are getting heavier and heavier. The stabilizer is not working, and now all the load falls on the small elevators. Every move is a struggle with the plane itself. Flaps to 15, the captain says shortly. Ouimet pulls the lever, and a low mechanical groan is heard overboard. The air falls on the wing, creating a vibration. The balance immediately changes, and the steering wheel becomes even heavier. Cameron holds on with both hands, not letting her nose fall. Sweat is streaming down my face under an oxygen mask, and my breathing is getting faster. The smoke in the cabin is no longer gray. It is dark with an amber tint, thick, as if you can touch it with your hands. The plastic panels are hot, and plaque is forming on them. Ouimet opens the upper escape hatch, but there's almost no air flow. Then he decides to take a crazy step, unlocks the side window lock. At an altitude of just over 2,000 feet, at a speed of 250 kilometers per hour, a roaring hurricane bursts into the cabin. Papers fly up, maps flutter, instruments shake from the pressure drop. But through this chaos, there's a moment of light. There's a gap right in front of them. Clouds tear like cloth. The ground is visible for a second. A cold stream knocks down the smoke, cleaning the cabin. Both pilots squint against the wind, but now at least they can breathe. Ouimet covers the window, shouts through the hum. There is visibility. Keep heading just a little more. At this point, the dispatcher, seeing the mark on the screen, commands. You're right on the glide path. The lights are on at maximum. I repeat, the lights are on maximum. There is light and radiance on the ground, as if the runway has turned into a lantern pointing the way through the smoke. Red, white, and blue lights pierce the fog, building a straight line of hope. Cameron sees them. At first, it was vague, like a reflection, then clearer, sharper. The lane is only 2 miles ahead. He pulls the steering wheel, adjusting the angle of descent. Landing gear down, he commands. The lever creaks, a green indicator flashes outside the window. The landing struts are released. Now all that remains is landing. No laps, no attempts. There's almost no fuel. The fire is gaining strength. The cabin is warming up. The air conditioning system is still off, and the air is turning into poison steam. Flight attendants prepare passengers for landing, but there is no speakerphone anymore. The commands go through shouts and gestures. In the cabin, everything merges into one sound. The hiss of oxygen, the hum of the wind, the clatter of instrument switches, the ringing of lights, as if the world around them is shaking. Speed 140, Ouimet says. Cameron responds not with words, but with movement. He levels the plane. His hands are numb from the effort, but he doesn't let go. They come out of the clouds. Below them are streaks of light reaching towards the horizon. The Earth is finally here. The lane is straight ahead. Visual contact has been established. One chance, one pass. The captain looks down at the speed gauge, then looks up again. Salvation is burning ahead, too close to make a mistake and too far away to relax. Ouimet holds on to the handrail tighter, ready for impact. He knows that if something goes wrong now, there won't be a second attempt. Everything is in these few seconds. Everything is compressed to a single line, a glide path to which the DC-9 is pressed, making its way through the remnants of smoke. There are fire trucks below, ready for a meeting. At the top is superheated metal, stretched like a string. One try. It's either landing now or never again. The captain sees the lane. It stretches forward like salvation, like a thin line between chaos and earth. Cameron steers the plane along the glide path, trying not to blink. The smoke gets into his eyes again, and every inch of the horizon matters. The speed is on the verge of 140 knots, slightly higher than normal, but it can no longer be reduced. Overloaded rudders lose efficiency. Flaps 30, he commands. Wheemet does, and the plane shakes as if resisting landing. They cross the strip a few meters above the ground. Control is ultimate. Every muscle in the captain's body is working to maintain course. The Earth is coming fast, too fast, and suddenly, a blow. The main pillars touch the concrete, gently at first, then abruptly with a bang. The landing gear buckles, and at the same moment Cameron presses the brakes. Without the anti-skid system, with de-energized sensors, the wheels lock instantly. The hum turns into a screech. Tires melt, smoke, and then tear. The plane slides along the concrete strip, leaving long trails of rubber and sparks. There are almost no brakes. The captain pulls the spoiler lever, activating the air brakes manually. The levers are shaking in my hands, as if they are resisting. The oncoming air pushes against the wings, dampening the speed. The cabin is shaking, and panels are falling in the cabin. The engines are still running, and their roar adds to the heat. The trigger, without waiting for a command, cuts off the fuel supply. The levers are in the cutoff position. The noise gradually subsides, replaced by the sound of tires on rough concrete. The plane continues to glide until it finally freezes in the middle of the runway. Everything is silence. Only a slight crackling of metal, which cools down after overexertion. Cameron breaks the silence first. The engines are stopped. Evacuation. Quickly. The flight attendants are already in action. The doors swing open. Inflatable ladders fly out of them. Black smoke billows from the cabin. Passengers get out one by one, stumbling, losing their shoes, clutching their hands. Screams, coughing, the hum of sirens. Pilots do not stay in the cockpit. They open their belts, run out into the aisle, but after a couple of steps they retreat. The air burns. The smoke is coming in a wall, thick, dense, and none of them can see beyond their own shoulders. Get back! Through the window! Cameron shouts. They come back, tear off the side windows. A stream of fresh air rushes in. Wheemet gets out first, lands on the wing, slides down. The captain remains. He freezes for a second, looking into the dark interior full of smoke, and tries to walk forward, but his lungs refuse to obey. He falls into a chair, exhausted. Fire trucks are already rushing outside, and one of the rescuers directs a jet of foam directly into the cabin window. The foam hits the captain in the face, cooling his skin, causing him to faint. He takes a deep breath and struggles out, holding onto the frame. His hands are shaking, his body is limp, but he's alive. There are still screams coming from behind, doors slamming, and the sound of ladders deflating. The crew continues to pull passengers out, but time is running out. 90 seconds have passed since the plane stopped. 90 seconds was exactly how long the illusion of salvation lasted. And then the air inside the liner exploded into flames. Streams of hot gas accumulated under the ceiling, ignited instantly, turning the cabin into a furnace. The light from the flash was blinding, as if the plane had taken off again. Only it was no longer metal that went up, but flame. A fiery wave passed from the tail to the cockpit, bringing down everything that remained intact. A minute later, a smoking wreck was left of the liner. There was still silence outside, broken only by sirens and the sound of metal cooling under the foam. But for those inside, those 90 seconds became the boundary between salvation and what no one else would survive. It didn't happen like in a movie, without warning, without countdown, without thunder. It's just a flash. Instantaneous, blinding, almost silent. The explosion is not from impact, not from fuel, but from the atmosphere inside the aircraft itself. The hot gases that had been accumulating under the ceiling for minutes reached the temperature of spontaneous combustion. One breath of oxygen from an open door, and the reaction became a chain reaction. In a matter of fractions of a second, the cabin, where a moment ago there was silence and smoke, turned into a continuous fiery whirlwind. This phenomenon is called flashover, the moment when air ceases to be air and becomes fuel. The flame went through the entire fuselage in seconds. The plastic of the chairs, the upholstery, the ceiling panels, all burst into flames at the same time. The heat hit in such a wave that even from the outside, the firefighters felt the heat through their gloves and the glass of the cab of their car. There is chaos inside. Those who stayed in the cabin tried to get to the nearest exits, but the smoke was thicker than the wall. Seconds later, they lost their bearings. There was no light. The ceiling lamps had long since gone out, and the floor was hot and sticky underfoot. People were moving by touch, but the direction was lost. Every breath became torture. The air burned my lungs. My eyes wouldn't open. The outside is a completely different picture. Fire trucks are already lined up along the strip around the burning building. Flames were shooting out of doors and windows, billowing towards the sky. The water from the gun barrels turned into steam as soon as it touched the metal. There are rescued passengers on the concrete strip, those who managed to jump out in the first moments after stopping. They're sitting on the ground, coughing, looking at the plane where the others are. The contrast was almost symbolic. Outside, life, order, commands on the radio. Inside, not a passage, but hell. Fiery tongues strike the ceiling. The paneling falls off in layers. The metal bends, emitting a dull, almost living moan. Firefighters make their way to the fuselage, open the side hatches, pour water inside. But the heat is so intense that even the equipment is giving up. The foam evaporates before reaching the floor. Where there were chairs a minute ago, there is already a flaming mine. Rescuers see how the cabin collapses from the inside. They manage to drag away several survivors, but it is impossible to enter inside. The explosive rise in temperature has done its job. Later, when the flames die down, the investigators will discover that most of the dead were between the center of the plane and the cockpit. It was only a few meters to the exit, but they hadn't found the way. In thick smoke, in the dark, without light, without landmarks. This moment will be the key to the new rules that will change aviation forever. Back in 1983, no one knew that a simple detail, glowing stripes on the floor, could lead dozens of people to the door. Why didn't the floor lighting bring them out? Because she wasn't there, yet. When the fire was finally extinguished, the charred frame of the liner remained. The metal is twisted by the heat, the casing is shrunken, the dashboard is black with soot. But the firefighters knew that now the work had to be handed over to those who looked not at the fire, but at its origin. To the investigators, their task is not just to understand what was burning, but why. The first thing that caught the eye of the experts was the place of the greatest burnout. The back toilet, exactly where it all started. It seemed obvious, the dumpster, the cigarette, the casual carelessness. But it soon became clear the urn was intact. There are no burnt napkins and paper inside, but on the contrary, traces of cooling from carbon dioxide. So the hearth is not here. Then the experts turned their attention to the space behind the wall. Charred pieces of insulation, fused aluminum strips, and remnants of cables were found under the removed panels. The wires came in bundles, the same ones that had been rearranged after the repair of the rear bulkhead 3 years ago. However, there was no visual confirmation of a short circuit. The metal burned out too much, the wires stuck together. Then the investigators turned to what wasn't burning, the recordings. The cockpit voice recorder, CVR, proved to be a crucial link. When the experts were scrolling through the recording of the first minutes of the flight, they heard a barely audible crackle, a short, sharp sound similar to an electric arc. It sounded just seconds before the 3 automatic flushing systems went off. Click after click, then a short pause, and then the calm voice of the captain. Let's check the panel. This meant one thing. The problem wasn't with the toilet pump. The machines were knocked out due to a voltage surge in a nearby circuit. And the next one is exactly the one where the cables went under the toilet floor and went to the back of the plane. There's a tangle of dozens of veins in this place. Where the wiring was manually soldered 3 years ago, the insulation may have weakened. The 2 veins touched each other, and a spark, almost invisible, became the beginning of the catastrophe. The engineers reproduced the scheme and checked the materials. Insulation is of the old type, polyvinyl chloride, prone to pyrolysis. When heated, it releases gas, which itself supports garage. That is, the short circuit did not just give a spark, it created fuel for the fire. That's how the fire was born. Not violently, not spectacularly, but insidiously, covertly. It smoldered behind the panels, accumulating heat, until it chewed through the air and turned the plane into a torch. The official report later wrote, "The probable cause is a short circuit in the electrical wiring behind the tailskin, which led to a fire in the insulation and spread a fire through the ducts." Not a point, but an almost philosophical conclusion. Technically impossible to prove, but the logic is ironclad. Fire was born where man cannot see, in a place that looks safe until it becomes deadly. The investigators closed the case with a sense of accomplishment, but one question remains in the air. If the reason is so insidious, how can you protect yourself next time? In aviation, every new rule is written not in ink, but in smoke. And if you look at the laws that appeared after Flight 797, then behind each line, you can see the charred outline of the DC-9 standing in the middle of the strip in Cincinnati. The first solution was the obvious, almost banal one. Every toilet should have a smoke detector. Today, this is the norm, and even light smoke from an aerosol is alarming. But that wasn't the case in 1983. No plane in the world was required to have an alarm system in the toilet. The crew relied only on their sense of smell and chance. The second innovation is the lighting on the interior floor. A simple idea. If smoke fills the ceiling and hides the lights, then the exit path should be visible from below. Now, when the lights go out on the plane, thin lines along the aisle turn on, green, white, or red, depending on the direction to the door. This did not happen then, and dozens of people lost their way within a few meters of escape. The third change is in the pilots' minds. After the investigation, international authorities introduced a key rule into the training programs. At the slightest sign of smoke, descend immediately. No discussions, no hypotheses, no, maybe it's just an urn. All checks and diagnostics are only on the way down. These minutes are the most valuable in any fire situation. The simulators are now working out scenarios where every second is scheduled. Pilots learn not only how to fly, but also how to live in smoke. Put on a mask in 4 seconds, talk through an oxygen system, and make decisions when instruments disappear one by one. The crew's protective equipment has also been updated. Now, there are not just oxygen masks in the cabin, but kits with hoses and filtration that allow you to breathe even at high concentrations of toxins. There are special hoods for flight attendants in the cabin, lightweight, airtight, with a transparent visor and a built-in filter. They give you precious minutes to get through the smoke and open the doors. The footage of modern training shows pilots in full gear practicing evacuation, instructors watching through the glass. There are smoke generators in the corner of the simulator, simulating smoke. The voices on the walkie-talkie sound calm. Switching to emergency power, Wall temperature control. Accepted. We carry out the reduction. Everything is verified, cool, and professional. But behind this honed procedure is the pain of those who did not manage to get out. The fire aboard Air Canada Flight 797 was a turning point. He changed designs, standards, and people's reactions. Today, airplanes are filled with sensors, insulating materials, and fire-resistant cables. Each panel is now labeled, where it can be opened, where it cannot. Every crew knows that smoke is not just an alarm, it is a countdown. But, as in any tragedy, the question remains not a technical one, but a human one. Now that airplanes are smarter than ever, and fire in the air seems almost impossible, we still understand that fire is not a myth of the past. He's just waiting for a weak spot, in the metal, in the wire, or in a decision made a second later. Technology has changed. The procedures have become more advanced. But what has changed in our head? Any disaster in the air is not only a chain of technical failures, but also a story of human decisions. An airplane is not just a car, it is an extension of the perception of the people sitting in the cockpit. And often it is perception that becomes the most vulnerable link. Flight 797 has become a classic example of how cognitive distortion can cost precious minutes. Captain Cameron and his first officer were not careless or unprofessional. On the contrary, they are experienced and reasonable. They did everything as they were taught. But that was the trap. When 3 vending machines were knocked out, logic told them the most likely thing: a toilet, a pump, a minor malfunction. When the steward reported the smoke, they again chose a familiar explanation: a trash can, a cigarette, but a standard situation. This phenomenon is called confirmation bias, the tendency to seek confirmation of an already accepted hypothesis, even if the facts say otherwise. And when the smoke began to clear, another psychological mechanism worked: normalization of deviations. When something goes wrong, but the plane is flying, a person gets used to the new normal and stops feeling threatened. Is the system slightly buggy? Things happen. Is the smoke disappearing? So, everything is under control. This belief in regularity puts you to sleep faster than the fire itself. The main conclusion that aviation came to after 1983 is simple. You need to speak directly. Not smoke, not smell, but burning behind the wall, the source is unknown. A commander cannot make a decision without precise words. Today, all the instructions of the crews say, pass on all the information, even if it seems that it is insignificant. In aviation, silence kills. Now simulators practice not only actions, but also communication under stress. Each command has a form, and each response has a template. No ambiguities, no assumptions. Words have become a survival tool. And yet, behind every new rule there is someone's mistake. Each disaster adds a point to the tutorial. Every line in the checklist is someone's life, turned into a rule. We cannot bring back those who remained on the Cincinnati Strip, but we can see how new standards have grown out of their tragedy, from floor lighting to instant reduction in smoke. And maybe that's exactly the paradox of aviation. Every fall makes the sky safer. The people who made mistakes under pressure in the cockpit have become part of a system that now does not allow the same mistakes. Aviation doesn't learn from success, it learns from pain. That's why her rules are so strict, and her memory is so long. But even this memory does not protect against future trials. Because in the sky, where everything is calculated down to the second, there's always a human factor, with his hope, fatigue, and the desire to believe that everything is under control. The following story is another lesson. When the smoke appears just a few minutes after takeoff, when the flames finally died down, only a skeleton remained of the plane, a curved metal cooling under the foam. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, there were 2 surviving pilots, burned, exhausted but alive. Captain Donald Cameron and First Officer Claude Ouimet. They brought the burning car down from 33,000 feet and landed it without instruments, without stabilizer, without navigation. On my hands, based on instincts, based on pure experience. They were credited with saving 23 lives. There was no way to save the others, and Cameron knew it. He admitted later, "We were seconds away from not making it at all." These seconds are the price of his decisions, his stubbornness, and strength. His mistakes are also part of that price. And yet he did the impossible. He brought the plane to the ground when many in his place would not even have had time to turn. The passengers who managed to get out later recalled not the screams or the heat, but the moment of silence after landing. That brief moment between life and the flash. When you're standing on a concrete strip, you can smell kerosene, and you can't believe you've just been inside. And then silence came, from which change grew. After Flight 797, clean fire training began in every cabin in the world. Blind masks, disconnected electrics, smoke. Captains no longer wait for confirmation, they act. The words "fire on board" no longer sound like a diagnosis. It's a command, the beginning of a countdown. And in salons all over the world, the lines of light at the floor lit up. A simple idea born out of the darkness. When smoke covers the ceiling, a person does not follow the voice, but the light under their feet. These thin paths have now become a symbol, a silent promise to those who visited Cincinnati. You did not show the way in vain. Their minutes, their 17 minutes of struggle, are woven into every takeoff, into every flight. And when a passenger walks along the lighted line to the exit, he follows the trail of those who once did not have time. The sky has become safer, but not because technology has become more advanced, but because people have learned to listen not only to devices, but also to their own doubts. Because now pilots know that it's not always a horse when you hear a click. Sometimes it's a zebra. Would we have been able to recognize the zebra earlier today?